we're back. Valis chose exactly that moment to raid in. Everyone, this is Valis. Thank you for the raid. Let's do a shout out to Valis. I don't know if it's pinging the way it's supposed to. I'm not sure if I ever was able to figure out why it was not doing it correctly, but welcome in, raiders. Hello, I am Vexing Cat, and I am primarily a reading or booktuber. Um, yeah, a raid. Let's do a quick shout out for Valis. Let's see if it populates correctly. Wow, I swear. Guru, you are cooked. And I don't know why. Let's see. Nope, it's shout out clips is right there. Not sure why it's not doing anything. 10 minutes from now. It just, actually, now that I think about it, Valis, we don't have any clips of your content just yet. We need to get some. If you were not here before, Valis is I'm gonna say mostly gaming streamer. They're also the DM for the D&D campaign, and it's there's so much. Just like they're a dungeon master. They're an amazing gamer, genuinely kind person, wonderful influence. Just if you haven't checked out their content, you should, and not just because I'm saying so, but because it's worth it. They're just getting started, so they're pretty new to the streaming game. Aw, thank you for the giant emote, Fallen. Hello. Hello, Raider Valis. I'm not sure that you've raided into my streams unless it was from like an Underrealm streamer's stream. Um, I was able to find a scanned copy of Tarzan of the Apes, so we can actually read from that now instead of the purely digital written copy. Let's pull up the book. There we go. So we have the book. So this is Tarzan of the Apes. Seems a bit off, but let me see if I can fix that real quick. I'd like it just a little bit smaller so we can see the title of each chapter at the top there. Perfect. Huzzah. Okay, so we're reading Tarzan of the Apes, which is the first of 24 separate novels written by Edgar Rice Burroughs. I've already read the first 9 chapters, which are both already up on my stream videos. I have spent the last week updating and adding content VODs, like just original VODs, onto my YouTube. And so if you want to go back and listen to those books, they'll be up there. I am going through the meticulous process of time stamping each chapter or each poem title. So that way, if someone wanted to listen to something in particular, they could go back. And then if they come back to the stream or come back to a VOD, they could go back to a specific chapter if they want to. I usually go to the beginning of the chapter when I say, like, hey, this is chapter 10, the fear phantom. And then I'll start it there rather than in between. I've also started taking out, I had the be right back breaks in there, but I'm just going to skip those and just put the next chapter so people can just whoop and go straight to it. Ah, well, I appreciate it, Fallen. That is really super kind. Um, let's see. I think we're in good shape. We've got the book up. We have water if we need it. We have caffeine if we need it. I already had a bagel, so I'm in good shape there. I guess just throw my hair up in a bun and let's get started. Okay. It is always good to see you, Tiny. And Os Muertos. Hey there, Vexing. Hope stream is going wonderfully. It's just getting started, Os Muertos. Or is it Los Muertos? Let's see here. Maybe we could just turn off the highlights. They always get confusing. Welcome in, Los Muertos. Welcome in, Tiny, Fallen, Valis. Anybody else that's here that's not saying anything, hello, welcome in. We're returning to... It's Kanye! Okay, Kanye Asada. Longtime friend. Oh, okay, you're gonna do some projects. That's cool. That's cool. I hope you'll be streaming. Speaking of streaming, if you guys are not familiar, I've got a couple other good friends here. Fallen. So Fallen Thespian is an actor and a streamer. They were playing, I don't know what the name of the game was, but it was a really cute cat doing magic stuff game today. Well, let's go ahead and give them a quick shout out.
It could be any of these chairs.
Aw, thanks for the sub.
L0 Smuvutters just subscribed.
It's
just my
piece of
my
shit.
alert over your stream.
Can somebody
Here.
rewind and watch me shoot that fucking mimic just before that happened?
What was that name of that game where you're in deep space and you were avoiding those creatures? Cat Quest 3 is what you were playing today. Yes. Also, if you guys aren't familiar with Tiny Draculina, so Tiny is the cutest darn vampire I have ever seen. And their content, they were playing, most recently they were doing Gravekeeper, I think. And they're part of the Underrealm community, which is some of the nicest people I've met so far in streaming and on the internet. See if I can give them a shout out too.
Why do I feel there's gonna be a boss soon?
That's a mood.
I've changed my mind! I want to go back!
You know, that's how I feel about spiders too, Tiny. Absolutely. Great content creator. They're just getting back on their feet. They had a wrist injury that they were recovering from. It was a little loud, but normally most of the shouts are, yeah, I never know what I'm gonna get. So Gringo Sunderwriter. Yes. Happy time zones. Welcome in. All right, everyone. We are gonna go ahead and get started and welcome in Gringo Sunderwriter, and welcome in, yes, Kanye. Nature needs spiders, but my house doesn't. That's a mood. Yeah, I have a kind of a live and let live if they're in the corners of my room sort of policy, but it's on site. It is on site if you mess with me in my restroom. I could be washing my hands, using the toilet, taking a shower. I do not care. If you cross the threshold of the holy shrine that is the restroom, on site. Moth, bee, spider, any kind of creepy crawly at all, just on site. I will either sick a cat on you or take a napkin and crush you and put you in the toilet. No. Yeah. Like, I've had them in my office before. I've even had them in my bedroom before. I do not care. It's just in bathrooms or sacred spaces. It's special. Vulnerable. All right. So we're on to chapter 10, The Fear Phantom, of Edgar Rice Burroughs' Tarzan of the Apes. I would have too, Tiny. I would have. From a lofty perch, Tarzan viewed the village of thatched huts across the intervening plantation. He saw that at one point the forest touched the village, and to this spot he made his way, lured by a fever of curiosity to behold animals of his own kind, and to learn more of their ways and view the strange lairs in which they lived. His savage life among the fierce, wild brutes of the jungle left no opening for any thought that these could be aught else than enemies. Similarity of form led him into no erroneous conception of the welcome that would be accorded him should he be discovered by these, the first of his own kind he had ever seen. Tarzan of the Apes was no sentimentalist. He knew nothing of the brotherhood of man. All things outside his own tribe were his deadly enemies, with the few exceptions of which Tantor the elephant was a marked example. And he realized all this without malice or hatred. To kill was the law of the wild world he knew. Few were his primitive pleasures, but the greatest of these was to hunt and kill, and so he accorded to others the right to cherish the same desires as he, even though he himself might be the object of their hunt.
Hygara13 gifted 2 subscriptions to the community.
Figure and let the audio on that end. Thank you for the gifted sub, Sigara. That's so kind. GMK303 and Baby Request, I hope you enjoy the emotes. And as always, Sigara, thank you. Thank you for your generosity. His strange life had left him neither morose nor bloodthirsty. That he joyed in killing, and that he killed with a joyous laugh upon his handsome lips, betokened no innate cruelty. Paying some more of your dues? Well, thank you. Maybe you shouldn't keep those books checked out quite so long. He killed for food most often, but being a man, he sometimes killed for pleasure, a thing which no other animal does. Well, except for cats. Yeah. For it has remained for man alone among all creatures to kill senselessly and wantonly for the mere pleasure of inflicting suffering and death. And when he killed for revenge or in self-defense, he did that also without hysteria, but it was a very businesslike proceeding, which admitted of no levity. So it was that now, as he cautiously approached the village of Mabonga, he was quite prepared either to kill or be killed should he be discovered. He proceeded with unwonted stealth, for Kulonga had taught him great respect for the little sharp splinters of wood which dealt death so swiftly and unerringly. At length he came to a great tree, heavy laden with thick foliage and loaded with pendant loops of giant creepers. From this almost impenetrable bower above the village he crouched, looking down upon the scene below him, wondering over every feature of this new, strange life. There were naked children running and playing in the village street. There were women grinding dried plantain in crude stone mortars, while others were fashioning cakes from the powdered flour. Out in the fields he could see still other women hoeing, weeding, or gathering. All wore strange protruding girdles of dried grass about their hips, and many were loaded with brass and copper anklets, armlets, and bracelets. Around many a dusky neck hung curiously coiled strands of wire, while several were further ornamented by huge nose rings. Tarzan of the Apes looked with growing wonder at these strange creatures. Dozing in the shade, he saw several men, while at the extreme outskirts of the clearing he occasionally caught glimpses of armed warriors, apparently guarding the village against surprise from an attacking enemy. He noticed that the women alone worked. Nowhere was there evidence of a man tilling the fields or performing any of the homely duties of the village. Finally, his eyes rested upon a woman directly beneath him. Before her was a small cauldron standing over a low fire, and in it bubbled a thick, reddish, tarry mass. On one side of her lay a quantity of wooden arrows, the points of which she dipped into the seething substance, then laying them upon a narrow rack of boughs which stood upon her other side. So kind of a grab, dip, place situation. Tarzan of the Apes was fascinated. Here was the secret of the terrible destructiveness of the archer's tiny missiles. He noted the extreme care which the woman took that none of the matter should touch her hands, and once when a particle spattered upon one of her fingers, he saw her plunge the member into a vessel of water and quickly rub the tiny stain away with a handful of leaves. Tarzan of the Apes knew nothing of poison, but his shrewd reasoning told him that it was this deadly stuff that killed, and not the little arrow, which was merely the messenger that carried it into the body of its victim. How he should like to have more of those little death-dealing slivers. If the woman would only leave her work for an instant, he could drop down, gather up a handful, and be back in the tree again before she drew 3 breaths. As he was trying to think out some plan to distract her attention, he heard a wild cry from across the clearing. He looked and saw a warrior standing beneath the very tree in which he had killed the murderer of Kala an hour before. The fellow was shouting and waving his spear above his head. Now and again he would point to something on the ground before him. The village was in an uproar instantly. Armed men rushed from the interior of many a hut and raced madly across the clearing toward the excited sentry. After them trooped the old men and the women and children until in a moment the village was deserted. Tarzan of the Apes knew that they had found the body of his victim, but that interested him far less than the fact that no one remained in the village to prevent his taking a supply of the arrows which lay below him. Quickly and noiselessly he dropped to the ground beside the cauldron of poison. For a moment he stood motionless, his quick, bright eyes scanning the interior of the palisade. No one was in sight. His eyes rested upon the open doorway of a nearby hut. He would take a look within, thought Tarzan, and so, cautiously, he approached the low thatched building. For a moment he stood without, listening intently. There was no sound, and he glided into the semi-darkness of the interior. Weapons hung against the walls. Long spears, strangely shaped knives, a couple of narrow shields. In the center of the room was a cooking pot, and at the far end a litter of dry grasses, covered by woven mats, which evidently served the owners as beds and bedding. Several human skulls lay upon the floor. Tarzan of the Apes felt of each article, hefted the spears, smelled of them, for he saw largely. Weird. He saw largely through his sensitive and highly trained nostrils. He determined to He determined to own one of these long, pointed sticks, but he could not take one on his trip because of the arrows he meant to carry. One by one, as he took each article from the walls, he placed them in a pile in the center of the room, and on top of all he placed the cooking pot, inverted, and on top of this he laid one of the grinning skulls, upon which he fastened the headdress of the dead Kulonga. Then he stood back and surveyed his work, and grinned. Tarzan of the Apes was a joker. But now he heard without the sounds of many voices, and long, mournful howls, and mighty wailing. He was startled. Had he remained too long? Quickly he reached the doorway and peered down the village street toward the village gate. The natives were not yet in sight, though he could plainly hear them approaching across the plantation. They must be very near. Like a flash, he sprang across the opening to the pile of arrows. Gathering up all he could carry under one arm, he overturned the seething cauldron with a kick and disappeared into the foliage above, just as the first of the returning natives entered the gate at the far end of the village street. Then he turned to watch the proceeding below. Poised like some wild bird ready to take swift wing at the first sign of danger. The natives filed up the street, 4 of them bearing the dead body of Kulonga. Behind trailed the women, uttering strange cries and weird lamentation. On they came to the portals of Kulonga's hut, the very one in which Tarzan had wrought his depredations. Scarcely had half a dozen entered the building ere they came rushing out in wild, jabbering confusion. The others hastened to gather about. There was much excited gesticulating, pointing, and chattering. Then several of the warriors approached and peered within. Finally, an old fellow with many ornaments of metal about his arms and legs and a necklace of dried human hands. Yikes. Depending upon his chest, entered the hut. It was Mbonga, the king, father of Kulonga. For a few moments all were silent. Then Mbonga emerged, a look of mingled wrath and superstitious fear writ upon his hideous countenance. He spoke a few words to the assembled warriors, and in an instant the men were flying through the little village, searching minutely every hut and corner within the palisade. Scarcely had the search commenced than the overturned cauldron was discovered, and with it the theft of the poisoned arrows. Nothing more they found, and it was a thoroughly awed and frightened group of savages which huddled around their king a few moments later. Mbonga could explain nothing of the strange events that had taken place. The finding of the still warm body of Kulonga, on the very verge of their fields and within easy earshot of the village, knifed and stripped at the door of his father's home, was in itself sufficiently mysterious. But these last awesome discoveries within the village, within the dead Kulonga's own hut, filled their hearts with dismay, and conjured in their poor brains only the most frightful of superstitious explanations. They stood in little groups, talking in low tones and ever casting affrighted glances behind them from their great rolling eyes. Tarzan of the Apes watched them for a while from his lofty perch in the great tree. There was much in their demeanor which he could not understand, for of superstition he was ignorant, and of a fear of any kind he had but a vague conception. The sun was high in the heavens. Tarzan had not broken fast this day, and it was many miles to where lay the toothsome remains of Horta the boar. So he turned his back upon the village of Mbonga and melted away into the leafy fastness of the forest. Dun dun dun. All right. So, everyone that is here, as you know, between chapters, I like to remind everyone to hydrate, caffeinate, grab a snack, do whatever it is that you need to become comfortable in order to enjoy the story. So, kind of intense. I can only imagine Mabonga, the father, the chief of the village, what his thought process would have looked like to first of all find out your son had been murdered at the edge of the village, and then to go back to his home and find that all of your son's personal belongings had been tossed into a pile and left with a skull with your son's headdress on it. How horrifying that must have been. How I can't even imagine. But yes, so I'm going to do a quick hydration myself and then we'll start on chapter 11. Orangeade. I don't think I've had orangeade before. It's like an orange flavored Gatorade? Gatorade. Or orange flavored Gatorade. Hmm. Something uniquely British, perhaps. All right. It's like Tang. Okay. Similar to Tang, maybe with more electrolytes in it. Perhaps better for you. We are on to chapter 11. Okay. King of the Apes. Chapter 11, King of the Apes. It was not yet dark when he reached the tribe, though he stopped to exhume and devour the remains of the wild boar he had cached the preceding day, and again to take Kulonga's bow and arrows from the treetop in which he had hidden them. It was a well-laden Tarzan who dropped from the branches into the midst of the tribe of Kerchak. With swelling chest he narrated the glories of his adventure and exhibited the spoils of conquest. Kerchak grunted and turned away, for he was jealous of this strange member of his band. In his little evil brain he sought for some excuse to wreak his hatred upon Tarzan. The next day Tarzan was practicing with his bow and arrows at the first gleam of dawn. At first he lost nearly every bolt he shot, but finally he learned to guide the little shafts with fair accuracy, and ere a month had passed he was no mean shot, but his proficiency had cost him nearly his entire supply of arrows. The tribe continued to find the hunting good in the vicinity of the beach, and so Tarzan of the Apes varied his archery practice with further investigation of his father's choice, though little store of books. It was during this period that the young English lord found hidden in the back of one of the cupboards in the cabin a small metal box. The key was in the lock, and a few moments' investigation and experimentation were rewarded with the successful opening of the receptacle. In it he found a faded photograph. Oh, it occurs to me. I thought I turned this on. Try that. There we go. Captions are now on. In it he found a faded photograph of a smooth-faced young man, a golden locket studded with diamonds, linked to a small golden chain, a few letters, and a small book. Tarzan examined these all minutely. The photograph he liked most of all, for the eyes were smiling, and the face was open and frank. It was his father. The locket, too, took his fancy, and he placed the chain about his neck in imitation of the ornamentation he had seen to be so common among the men he had visited. The brilliant stones gleamed strangely against his smooth brown hide. The letters he could scarcely decipher, for he had learned little or nothing of script, so he put them back in the box with the photograph and turned his attention to the book. This was almost entirely filled with fine script, but while the little bugs were all familiar to him, their arrangement and the combinations in which they occurred were strange and entirely incomprehensible. Tarzan had long since learned the use of the dictionary, but much to his sorrow and perplexity, it proved of no avail to him in this emergency. Not a word of all that was writ in the book could he find, and so he put it back in the middle box, but with a determination to work out the mysteries of it later on. Poor little ape man! Had he but known it, that tiny, baffling mystery held between its seal covers the key to his origin, the answer to the strange riddle of his strange life. It was the diary of John Clayton, Lord Greystoke, kept in French as had always been his custom. Tarzan replaced the box in the cupboard, but always thereafter he carried the features of the strong, smiling face of his father in his heart, and in his head a fixed determination to solve the mystery of the strange words in the little black book. At present, he had more important business in hand, for his supply of arrows was exhausted, and he must needs journey to the men's village and renew it. Early the following morning he set out, and traveling rapidly he came before midday to the clearing. Once more he took up his position in the great tree, and, as before, he saw the women. He saw the women in the fields in the village street, and the cauldron of bubbling poison directly beneath him. For hours he lay, awaiting his opportunity to drop down unseen and gather up the arrows for which he had come, but nothing now occurred to call the villagers away from their homes. The day wore on, and still Tarzan of the Apes crouched above the unsuspecting woman at the cauldron. Presently the workers in the fields returned. The hunting warriors emerged from the forest, and when all were within the palisade, the gates were closed and barred. Many cooking pots were now in evidence about the village. Before each hut a woman presided over a boiling stew, while little cakes of plantain and cassava puddings were to be seen on every hand. Suddenly there came a hail from the edge of the clearing. Tarzan looked. It was a party of belated hunters returning from the north, and among them they half led, half carried a struggling animal. As they approached the village, the gates were thrown open to admit them, and then, as the people saw the victim of the chase, a savage cry rose to the heavens, for the quarry was a man. As he was dragged, still resisting, into the village street, the women and children set upon him with sticks and stones, and Tarzan of the Apes, young and savage beast of the jungle, wondered at the cruel brutality of his own kind. Sheeta, the leopard, alone of all the jungle folk, tortured his prey. The ethics of all the others meted a quick and merciful death to their victims. Tarzan had learned from his books but scattered fragments of the ways of human beings. When he had followed Kulonga through the forest, he had expected to come to a city of strange houses on wheels, puffing clouds of black smoke from a huge tree stuck in the roof of one of them, or to a sea covered with mighty floating buildings, which he had learned were called variously ships and boats and steamers and craft. He had been sorely disappointed with the poor little village of them, hidden away in his own jungle, and with not a single house as large as his own cabin upon the distant beach. He saw that these people were more wicked than his own apes, and as savage and cruel as Sabor herself. Tarzan began to hold his own kind in but low esteem. Now they had tied their poor victim to a great post near the center of the village, directly before Mbonga's hut, and here they formed a dancing, yelling circle of warriors about him, alive with flashing knives and menacing spears. In a larger circle squatted the women, yelling and beating upon drums. It reminded Tarzan of the Dum-Dum, and so he knew what to expect. He wondered if they would spring upon their meat while it was still alive. The apes did not do such things as that. The circle of warriors about the cringing captive drew closer and closer to their prey as they danced in wild and savage abandon to the maddening music of the drums. Presently, a spear reached out and pricked the victim. It was the signal for 50 others. Eyes, ears, arms, and legs were pierced. Every inch of the poor, writhing body that did not cover a vital organ became the target of the cruel lancers. The women and children shrieked their delight. The warriors licked their hideous lips in anticipation of the feast to come, and vied with one another in the savagery and loathsomeness of the cruel indignities with which they tortured the still conscious prisoner. Then it was that Tarzan of the Apes saw his chance. All eyes were fixed upon the thrilling spectacle at the stake. The light of day had given place to the darkness of a moonless night, and only the fires in the immediate vicinity. Hi, Tiger Faye. Welcome in. And only the fires in the immediate vicinity of the orgy had been kept alight to cast a restless glow upon the restless scene. Gently, the lithe boy dropped to the soft earth at the end of the village street. Quickly, he gathered up the arrows, all of them this time, for he had brought a number of long fibers to bind them into a bundle. Without haste, he wrapped them securely, and then, ere he turned to leave, the devil of capriciousness entered his heart. Hi, Space. Welcome in. He looked about for some hint of a wild prank to play upon these strange, grotesque creatures, that they might be again aware of his presence among them. Dropping his bundle of arrows at the foot of the tree, Tarzan crept among the shadows at the side of the street, until he came to the same hut he had entered on the occasion of his first visit. Inside all was darkness, but his groping hands soon found the object for which he sought, and without further delay he turned again toward the door. He had taken but a step. However, ere his quick ear caught the sound of approaching footsteps immediately without, in another instant the figure of a woman darkened the entrance of the hut. Tarzan drew back silently to the far wall, and his hand sought the long, keen hunting knife of his father. The woman came quickly to the center of the hut. There she paused for an instant, feeling about with her hands for the thing she sought. Evidently it was not in its accustomed place, for she explored ever nearer and nearer the wall where Tarzan stood. So close was she now that the ape-man felt the animal warmth of her naked body. Up went the hunting knife, and then the woman turned to one side, and soon a guttural "ah" proclaimed that her search had at last been successful. Immediately she turned and left the hut, and as she passed through the doorway, Tarzan saw that she carried a cooking pot in her hand. He followed closely after her, and as he reconnoitered from the shadows of the doorway, he saw that all the women of the village were hastening to and from the various huts with pots and kettles. Things are not looking good for the prisoner. These they were filling with water and placing over a number of fires near the stake where the dying victim now hung, an inert and bloody mass of suffering. Also, welcome in, Archivist. Choosing a moment when none seemed near, Tarzan hastened to his bundle of arrows beneath the great tree at the end of the village street. As on the former occasion, he overthrew the cauldron before leaping, sinuous and cat-like, into the lower branches of the forest giant. Silently he climbed to a great height until he found a point where he could look through a leafy opening upon the scene beneath him. The women were now preparing the prisoner for their cooking pots. While the men stood about resting after the fatigue of their mad revel. Comparative quiet reigned in the village. Tarzan raised aloft the thing he had pilfered from the hut, and with aim made true by years of fruit and coconut throwing, launched it toward the group of savages. Squarely among them it fell, striking one of the warriors full upon the head and felling him to the ground. Then it rolled among the women and stopped beside the half-butchered thing they were preparing to feast upon. All gazed in consternation at it for an instant, and then, with one accord, broke and ran for their huts. It was a grinning human skull, which looked up at them from the ground. The dropping of the thing out of the open sky was a miracle well aimed to work upon their superstitious fears. Thus, Tarzan of the Apes left them filled with terror at this new manifestation of the presence of some unseen and unearthly evil power which lurked in the forest about their village. Later, when they discovered the overturned cauldron, and that once more their arrows had been pilfered, it commenced to dawn upon them that they had offended some great god who ruled this part of the jungle by placing their village there without propitiating him. Propitiate? What's the word? Win or regain favor of. Propitiate. Okay. The more you know. Okay. Without propitiating him. There we go. From then on, an offering of food was daily placed below the great tree from whence the arrows had disappeared, in an effort to consolate the mighty one. But the seed of fear was deep sown, and had he but known it, Tarzan of the Apes had laid the foundation for much future misery for himself and his tribe. That night he slept in the forest, not far from the village, and early the next morning set out slowly on his homeward march, hunting as he traveled. Only a few berries and an occasional grub worm rewarded his search, and he was half famished when, looking up from a log he had been rooting beneath, he saw Sabor, the lioness, standing in the center of the trail not 20 paces from him. The great yellow eyes were fixed upon him with a wicked and baleful gleam, and the red tongue licked the longing lips as Sabor crouched, worming her stealthy way with belly flattened against the earth. Tarzan did not attempt to escape. He welcomed the opportunity for which, in fact, he had been searching for days past, not now armed only with a rope of grass. Quickly he unslung his bow and fitted a well-daubed arrow, and as Sabor sprang, the tiny missile leaped to meet her in midair. At the same instant, Tarzan of the Apes jumped to one side, and as the great cat struck the ground beyond him, another death-tipped arrow sunk deep into Sabor's loin. With a mighty roar, the beast turned and charged once more, only to be met with a third arrow full in one eye. But this time she was too close upon the ape-man for the latter to sidestep the onrushing body. Tarzan of the Apes went down beneath the great body of his enemy, but with the gleaming knife drawn and striking home. For a moment they lay there, and then Tarzan realized that the inert mass lying upon him was beyond power ever again to injure man or ape. Welcome in, Bonecaller. With difficulty, he wriggled from beneath the great weight, and as he stood erect and gazed down upon the trophy of his skill, a mighty wave of exultation swept over him. With swelling breast, he placed a foot upon the body of his powerful enemy, and throwing back his fine young head, roared out the awful challenge of the victorious bull ape. The forest echoed to the savage and triumphant. I don't know what that is. Paean? Paean? Paean. Paean. Okay. A song of praise or triumph, a thing that expresses enthusiastic praise. Paean. European. Ah. The forest echoed to the savage and triumphant paean. Birds fell silent, and the larger animals and beasts of prey slunk stealthily away, for few there were of all the jungle who sought for trouble with the great anthropoids. And in London another Lord Greystoke was speaking to his kind in the House of Lords, but none trembled at the sound of his soft voice. Sabor proved unsavory eating even to Tarzan of the Apes, but hunger served as the most efficacious disguise to toughness and rank taste. And ere long, with well-filled stomach, the ape man was ready to sleep again. First, however, he must remove the hide, for it was as much for this as for any other purpose that he had desired to encompass the destruction of Sabor. Deftly he removed the great pelt, for he had practiced often on smaller animals. When the task was finished, he carried his trophy to the fork of a high tree, and there, curling himself securely in a crotch, he fell into deep and dreamless slumber. What with loss of sleep, arduous exercise, and a full belly, Tarzan of the Apes slept the sun around, awakening about noon of the following day. He straightway repaired to the carcass of Sabor, but was angered to find the bones picked clean by other hungry denizens of the jungle. Half an hour's leisurely progress through the forest brought to sight a young deer, and before ever the little creature knew that an enemy was near, a tiny arrow had lodged in its neck. So quickly the virus worked that at the end of a dozen steps the deer plunged headlong into the undergrowth, dead. Again did Tarzan feast well, but this time he did not sleep. Instead, he hastened on toward the point where he had left the tribe, and when he had found them, proudly exhibited the skin of Sabor, the lioness. "Look," he cried, "apes of Kerchak, see what Tarzan the mighty killer has done. Who else among you has ever killed one of Numa's people? Tarzan is mightiest among you, for Tarzan is no ape. Tarzan is." But here he stopped, for in the language of the anthropoids there was no word for man, and Tarzan could only write the word in English. He could not pronounce it. The tribe had gathered about to look upon the proof of his wondrous prowess and to listen to his words. Only Kerchak hung back, nursing his hatred and his rage. Suddenly, something snapped in the wicked little brain of the anthropoid. With a frightful roar, the great beast sprang among the assemblage. Biting and striking with his huge hands, he killed and maimed a dozen ere the balance could escape to the upper terraces of the forest. Frothing and shrieking in the insanity of his fury, Kerchak looked about for the object of his greatest hatred, and there, upon a nearby limb, he saw him sitting. Come down, Tarzan, great killer, cried Kerchak. Come down and feel the fangs of a greater. Do mighty fighters fly to the trees at the first approach of danger? And then Kerchak emitted the volleying challenge of his kind. Quietly, Tarzan dropped to the ground, breathlessly. The tribe watched from their lofty perches as Kerchak, still roaring, charged the relatively puny figure. Nearly 7 feet stood Kerchak on his short legs. His enormous shoulders were bunched and rounded with huge muscles. The back of his short neck was as a single lump of iron sinew, which bulged beyond the base of his skull, so that his head seemed like a small ball protruding from a huge mountain of flesh. His back drawn, snarling lips exposed, his great fighting fangs, and his little, wicked, bloodshot eyes gleamed in horrid reflection of his madness. Awaiting him stood Tarzan, himself a mighty, muscled animal. But his 6 feet of height and his great rolling sinews seemed pitifully inadequate to the ordeal which awaited them. His bow and arrows lay some distance away where he had dropped them while showing Sabor's hide to his fellow apes. So that he confronted Kerchak now with only his hunting knife and his superior intellect to offset the ferocious strength of his enemy. As his antagonist came roaring toward him, Lord Greystoke tore his long knife from its sheath, and with an answering challenge as horrid and blood-curdling as that of the beast he faced, rushed swiftly to meet the attack. He was too shrewd to allow those long, hairy arms to encircle him, and just as their bodies were about to crash together, Tarzan of the Apes grasped one of the huge wrists of his assailant, and springing lightly to one side, drove his knife to the hilt in Kerchak's body below the heart. Before he could wrench the blade free again, the bull's quick lunge to seize him in those awful arms had torn the weapon from Tarzan's grasp. Kerchak aimed a terrific blow at the ape man's head with the flat of his hand, a blow which, had it landed, might easily have crushed in the side of Tarzan's skull. The man was too quick, and ducking beneath it, himself delivered a mighty one, with clenched fist, in the pit of Kerchak's stomach. The ape was staggered, and what with the mortal wound in his side had almost collapsed when, with one mighty effort, he rallied for an instant, just long enough to enable him to wrest his arm free from Tarzan's grasp and close in a terrific clinch with his wiry opponent. Straining, the ape-man close to him, his great jaws sought Tarzan's throat, but the young lord's sinewy fingers were at Kerchak's own, before the cruel fangs could close on the sleek brown skin. Thus they struggled, the one to crush out his opponent's life with those awful teeth, the other to close forever the windpipe beneath his strong grasp, the while he held the snarling mouth from him. The greater strength of the ape was slowly prevailing, and the teeth of the straining beast were scarce an inch from Tarzan's throat when, with a shuddering tremor, the great body stiffened for an instant, and then, I'm guessing weak, fell. I can only imagine what this word is supposed to be. No idea. The great body stiffened for an instant and then fell limply to the ground. I can only guess. Smack, maybe? And then smack limply to the ground. This doesn't ring true. I don't know. Kerchak was dead, withdrawing the knife that had so often rendered him master of far mightier muscles than his own. Tarzan of the Apes placed his foot upon the neck of his vanquished enemy, and once again, loud through the forest rang the fierce, wild cry of the conqueror. And thus came the young Lord Greystoke into the kingship of the apes. Dun dun dun. Oh, Slunk would have been good. I don't know. It's an AK at the end of it. I'm not sure what that could have been. Yeah, not sure. Don't know. So we are between chapters, and if you're not familiar with my process, be sure to take a moment to hydrate, which is what I'm going to do. Grab a snack, grab a blanket, curl up for a good story. It's kind of action-packed right now, but now Tarzan has killed his greatest enemy. Two of his greatest enemies. The lioness, and now Kerchak, the king of the anthropoids. Well, I'm glad to hear that, Tiny. It's an interesting story, a little violent, but it is very interesting. Also, I think I had 2 words in that chapter I needed to look up, so word, there we go. Running vexatious words that I have to look up. Peon was kind of interesting. All right. So we are on a 3rd chapter here. This is chapter 12. After this chapter, we'll probably do a 5-minute break. Get some ads out of the way because it's gonna yell at me. And then while that's doing that, I'll refill my water, which is almost empty, and take a quick bathroom break.
3M_French Free Spoiper Pass just followed.
Welcome in, 3 a.m. French fries, boy papas. Aw, thank you, thank you. Part 1 and 2 are still up in my VODs. That I have not transferred them over to my YouTube yet. Is it Linktree? So if you want to follow me on other platforms, I'm on YouTube. I have a few TikToks that are just clips from videos here on Twitch. You're welcome to check those out. And eventually I'll have a Discord where I will communicate with and post art in and do various things. So for all of you wonderful listeners, be sure to stretch. Good stretch. And because I am terribly Alaskan, I'm going to crack open a soda of spruce tip.
D3RP13 just followed.
Derp13, welcome in. Oh, that slaps. That is good. Nothing like a cold bit of soda with spruce tips in it. I don't have one yet. French fry, not yet. Should I call you Frenchie? What would you like to be called? It's a work in progress. I want to get roles set up. I want to get various channels set up. I have one that is not ready for public consumption. I'm gonna have it ready by my affiliate anniversary in November. Derp or derpy? You got it. I can do that. Ruthie! What are you doing?
Ruthie Wren just raided with 15 viewers.
Oh my goodness. Raiders, oh my goodness. Welcome in. Hello. I am Vexing Cat, and I am a tiger librarian. I primarily read classic literature and poetry and occasionally play games. On alternating Sundays, that includes D&D. I am a huge nerd. If you have not been here before, welcome in. I ask that you're taking care of yourselves, and like Ruthie, especially, you've been streaming for hours. Um, Hydrate, caffeinate, grab a snack, do whatever it is that you need to kind of recharge and relax. I am currently reading Edgar Rice Burroughs' Tarzan of the Apes, which is the first of 24 full length novels. I did not realize how prolific of a series of books these were. Time for that sweet post stream care. Oh, yeah, the good stuff. Post stream self care is the best. Aw. Wouldn't call yourself a nerd because you're a cool streamer and people love you. These are not mutually exclusive. I think being nerdy, being, geeky, whatever you want to call it, just being your authentic self, whatever that looks like for you, is awesome. So if that means going out in the bayou and doing some fishing, or going, to a sports game and playing sports ball, whatever it is that's your thing, be your authentic self. Yes, nerdy and geeky is wonderful. I think I'm with you on that one, Tiny. Yeah. I think that's why a lot of people enjoy Twitch in the first place, is we're here sharing our loves, the makers and creators, the artists, the streamers that do gaming content, sharing their love of content. The authentic streamers are the best kinds to watch. And hopefully you can get some of that from my stories and the books that I'm reading. Let's see here. Grab this real quick. Just want to fix that. So I think I need to move this up a little. This one. Move it up a little. Boop. There we go. I think that's a little bit better. No missing spots. So this is chicken nuggies and french fries. Oh my. Awesome. Okay, and then Derpy, french fries, do you know each other? Okay. Yeah, low key, I kind of want some french fries and nuggies too. That would be awesome. That would be good after dinner or after stream dinner, I think. Okay. We are on to chapter 12. Let's go ahead and read this next chapter so we can get through it without having to deal with ads. And then after, we'll go on a quick break and we will continue the read. So, once again, Raiders, thank you so much for stopping by. I hope you enjoy this story. And please relax. I know Ruthie, oh, man, Ruthie is one of the better ones, too. Let's give Ruthie a shout out. It should. There we go. I don't know. It hasn't been pinging, and I don't know why Guru is not acting the way it's supposed to. It is still pulling up the VOD, though, hopefully.
There's also things like apparently you can go fishing.
Sexy for?
Jesus Christ! Motherfucker!
Yeah, I can be, man. What's up?
Oh my god.
I was just wondering where your location's currently.
Looks like we've got some, the words are escape me. Feels like you're in class right now, and I'm the teacher, and the viewers are the kids. Well, librarians kind of have that vibe, so I can't say that I blame you there. It should, gosh. So Ruthie was just streaming. What was that game? Bear with me. I really wish it would just like clip the most recent ending of whatever you were playing. Tavern Manager. So that one was from Tavern Manager? That's what you were playing today? Gosh. I know you're doing the middle of a subathon. It makes it very hard for me to jump into you to celebrate. Yeah, Grand Theft Auto roleplay. 1 second. Pardon. Pardon me. Excuse me. So yes, Grand Theft Auto. That's what I was trying to remember. Um, thank you. Thank you. All right. Everyone, let's get back to the story. So at this point, Tarzan has no further rivals within the anthropoid community, though he has created for himself, unbeknownst to him, enemies within the local tribe. We'll see where that goes, but his adoptive mother, Kala, is passed away, and he got revenge on the man who killed her. So we'll see what happens now. Very, very different story than the Disney movie, or very different than other modern interpretations of Tarzan that I have seen, including the children's book. So, Chapter 12, Man's Reason. There was one of the tribe of Tarzan who questioned his authority, and that was Turkaz, the son of Tublat, but he so feared the keen knife and the deadly arrows of his new lord that he confined the manifestation of his objections to petty disobediences and irritating mannerisms. Tarzan knew, however, that he but waited his opportunity to wrest the kingship from him by some sudden stroke of treachery, and so he was ever on his guard against surprise. For months, the life of the little band went on much as it had before, except that Tarzan's greater intelligence and his ability as a hunter were the means of providing for them more bountifully than ever before. Most of them, therefore, were more than content with the change of rulers. Tarzan led them by night to the fields of the men, and there, warned by their chief's superior wisdom, they ate only what they required, nor ever did they destroy what they could not eat, as is the way of Manu the monkey, and of most apes. So while the villagers were wroth at the continued pilferings of their fields, they were not discouraged in their efforts to cultivate the land, as would have been the case had Tarzan permitted his people to lay waste the plantation wantonly. During this period, Tarzan paid many nocturnal visits to the village, where he often renewed his supply of arrows. He soon noticed the food always standing at the foot of the tree, which was his avenue into the palisade, and after a little he commenced to eat whatever the villagers put there. When the awestruck savages saw that the food disappeared overnight, they were filled with consternation and awe, for it was one thing to put food out to propitiate out to propitiate a god or a devil. T8, wow, same word as before. Struggle. Propitiate. It was one thing to put food out to propitiate a god or a devil, but quite another thing to have the spirit really come into the village and eat it. Such a thing was unheard of, and it filled their superstitious minds with all manner of vague fears. Nor was this all. The periodic disappearance of their arrows and the strange pranks perpetrated by unseen hands had wrought them to such a state that life had become a veritable burden in their new home, and now it was that Mbonga and his head men began to talk of abandoning the village and seeking a site further on in the jungle. Presently the warriors began to strike further and further south into the heart of the forest when they went to hunt, looking for a site for a new village. More often was the tribe of Tarzan disturbed by these wandering huntsmen. Now was the quiet, fierce solitude of the primeval forest broken by new, strange cries. No longer was there safety for bird or beast. Man had come. Other animals passed up and down the jungle by day and by night. Fierce, cruel beasts, but their weaker neighbors only fled for their immediate vicinity, to return again when the danger was past. There we go. With man, it is different. When he comes, many of the larger animals instinctively leave the district entirely, seldom if ever to return, and thus it has always been with the great anthropoids. They flee man as man flees a pestilence. For a short time, the tribe of Tarzan lingered in the vicinity of the beach, because their new chief hated the thought of leaving the treasured contents of the little cabin forever. But when one day a member of the tribe discovered the hunters in great numbers on the banks of a little stream that had been their watering place for generations, and in the act of clearing a space in the jungle and erecting many huts, the apes would remain no longer, and so Tarzan led them inland for many marches to a spot as yet undefiled by the foot of a human being, except his own. Once every moon, Tarzan would go swinging rapidly back through the swaying branches to have a day with his books and to replenish his supply of arrows. This latter task was becoming more and more difficult, for the villagers had taken to hiding their supply away at night in granaries and living huts. This necessitated watching by day on Tarzan's part to discover where the arrows were being concealed. Twice had he entered huts at night while the inmates lay sleeping upon their mats, and stolen the arrows from the very sides of the warriors. But this method he realized to be too fraught with danger, and so he commenced picking up solitary hunters with his long, deadly noose, stripping them of weapons and ornaments, and dropping their bodies from a high tree into the village street during the still watches of the night. These various escapades again so terrorized the villagers, that had it not been for the monthly respite between Tarzan's visits, in which they had opportunity to renew hope that each fresh incursion would prove the last, they soon would have abandoned their new village. The villagers had not yet come upon Tarzan's cabin or on the distant beach, but the ape man lived in constant dread that, while he was away with the tribe, they would discover and despoil his treasure. So it came that he spent more and more time in the vicinity of his father's last home, and less with the tribe. Presently the members of his little community began to suffer on account of his neglect, for disputes and quarrels constantly arose, which only the king might settle peaceably. At last, some of the older apes spoke to Tarzan on the subject, and for a month thereafter he remained constantly with the tribe. The duties of kingship among the anthropoids are not many or arduous. In the afternoon comes Thaka, possibly to complain that old Mungo had stolen his new wife. Then must Tarzan summon all before him, and if he finds that the wife prefers her new lord, he commands that matters remain as they are, or possibly that Mungo give Thaka one of his daughters in exchange. Whatever his decision, the apes accepted as final, and returned to their occupations satisfied. Then comes Tana, shrieking and holding tight her side from which blood is streaming. Gunto, her husband, has cruelly bitten her, and Gunto, summoned, says that Tana is lazy and will not bring him nuts and beetles or scratch his back for him. So Tarzan scolds them both and threatens Gunto with a taste of the death-bearing slivers if he abuses Tana further, and Tana, for her part, is compelled to promise better attention to her wifely duties. And so it goes. Little family differences, for the most part, which, if left unsettled, would result finally in greater factional strife and the eventual dismemberment of the tribe. But Tarzan, tired of it as he found the kingship meant the curtailment of his liberty, he longed for the little cabin and the sun-kissed sea.
True Pot Forter just followed.
Welcome in, True Potato. For the cool interior of the well-built house, and for the never-ending wonders of the many books. As he had grown older, he found that he had grown away from his people. Their interests and his were far removed. They had not kept pace with him, nor could they understand aught of the many strange and wonderful dreams that passed through the active brain of their human king. So limited was their vocabulary that Tarzan could not even talk with them of the many new truths, and the great fields of thought that his reading had opened up before his longing eyes, or make known ambitions which stirred his soul. It's okay, True Potato, don't worry about it. Among the tribe he no longer had friends, and cronies as of old. A little child may find companionship in many strange and simple creatures, but to a grown man there must be some semblance of equality in intellect as the basis for agreeable consociation. Had Kala lived, Tarzan would have sacrificed all else to remain near her, but now that she was dead, and the playful friends of his childhood grown into fierce and surly brutes, he felt that he much preferred the peace and solitude of his cabin to the irksome duties of leadership amongst a horde of wild beasts. The hatred and jealousy of Turkos, son of Tublat, did much to counteract the effect of Tarzan's desire to renounce his kingship among the apes. For, stubborn young Englishman that he was, he could not bring himself to retreat in the face of so malignant an enemy. Stubbornness. Stubbornness. Oh, man. Some people's kids. My goodness.
Shvasapt just followed.
I'm going to say JavaScript. I'm not sure. Feel free to let me know what you'd prefer to be called. That Turkos would be chosen leader in his stead he knew full well, for time and again the ferocious brute had established his claim to physical supremacy over the few bull apes who had dared resent his savage bullying. Tarzan would have liked to have subdued the ugly beast without recourse to knife or arrows, so much had his great strength and agility increased in the period following his maturity that he had come to believe that he might master the redoubtable Turkos in a hand-to-hand fight, were it not for the terrible advantage the anthropoid's huge fighting fangs gave him over the poorly armed Tarzan. The entire matter was taken out of Tarzan's hands one day by force of circumstances, and his future left open to him, so that he might go or stay without any stain upon his savage escutcheon. Escutcheon? That's a good word. That's a $5 word right there. How does that sound? Apparently has more than one definition. Escutcheon. Escutcheon. Woo, what a word. Escutcheon. Escutcheon. A shield or emblem bearing a coat of arms, a flat piece of metal for protection and often ornamentation around a keyhole, door handle, or light switch. Not a lot of keyholes have an escutcheon these days. So without any, so I'm going to say this, a shield or emblem. Wild. Okay. So that he might go or stay without any stain upon his savage escutcheon. It happened thus. The tribe was feeding quietly, spread over a considerable area, when a great screaming arose some distance east of where Tarzan lay, upon his belly beside a limpid brook, attempting to catch an elusive fish in his quick brown hands. With one accord, the tribe swung rapidly toward the frightened cries, and there found Turquoise holding an old female by the hair and beating her unmercifully with his great hands. As Tarzan approached, he raised his hand aloft for Turquoise to desist, for the female was not his, but belonged to a poor old ape whose fighting days were long over, and who, therefore, could not protect his family. Turquoise knew that it was against the laws of his kind to strike the woman of another, but being a bully, he had taken advantage of the weakness of the female's husband to chastise her because she had refused to give up to him a tender young rodent she had captured. A lazy bully. Ick. When Turquoise saw Tarzan approaching without his arrows, he continued to belabor the poor woman in studied effort to affront his hated chieftain. Tarzan did not repeat his warning signal, but instead rushed bodily upon the waiting Turquoise. Never had the ape men fought so terrible a battle since the long-gone day when Bolgani, the great king gorilla, had so horribly manhandled him ere the new-found knife had, by accident, pricked the savage heart. Tarzan's knife on the present occasion but barely offset the gleaming fangs of Turquoise, and what little advantage the ape had over the man in brute strength was almost balanced by the latter's wonderful quickness and agility. In the sum total of their points, however, the anthropoid had a shade the better of the battle, and had there been no other personal attribute to influence the outcome, Tarzan of the Apes, the young Lord Greystoke, had died as he had lived, an unknown savage beast in equatorial Africa. But there was that which had raised him far above his fellows of the jungle, that little spark which spells the whole vast difference between man and brute. Reason. This it was this it was which saved him from death beneath the iron muscles and tearing fangs of Turquoise. Scarcely had they fought a dozen seconds ere they were rolling upon the ground, striking, tearing, and rending, two great savage beasts battling to the death. Turquoise had a dozen knife wounds on head and breast, and Tarzan was torn and bleeding, his scalp in one place half torn from his head, so that a great piece hung over one eye, obstructing his vision. But so far, the young Englishman had been able to keep those horrible fangs from his jugular, and now, as they fought less fiercely for a moment to regain their breath, Tarzan formed a cunning plan. He would work his way to the others back and clinging there with tooth and nail, drive his knife home until Turquoise was no more. The maneuver was accomplished more easily than he had hoped, for the stupid beast, not knowing what Tarzan was attempting, made no particular effort to prevent the accomplishment of the design. But when, finally, he realized that his antagonist was fastened to him where his teeth and fists alike were useless against him, Turquoise hurled himself upon the ground so violently that Tarzan could but cling desperately to the leaping, turning, twisting body, and ere he had struck a blow, the knife was hurled from his hand by a heavy impact against the earth, and Tarzan found himself defenseless. During the rollings and squirmings of the next few minutes, Tarzan's hold was loosened 12 times, until finally an accidental circumstance of those swift and ever-changing evolutions gave him a new hold with his right hand, which he soon realized was absolutely unassailable. His arm was passed beneath Turquoise's arm from behind, and his hand and forearm encircled the back of Turquoise's neck. It was the half-Nelson of modern wrestling which the untaught ape-man had stumbled upon, but divine reason showed him in an instant the value of the thing he had discovered. It was the difference to him between life and death. And so he struggled to encompass a similar hold with the left hand, and in a few moments Turquoise's bull neck was creaking beneath a full Nelson. There was no more lunging about now. The two lay perfectly still upon the ground, Tarzan upon Turquoise's back. Slowly the bullet head of the ape was being forced lower and lower upon his chest. Tarzan knew what the result would be. In an instant the neck would break. Then there came to Turquoise's rescue the same thing that had put him in those sore straits, a man's reasoning power. If I kill him, thought Tarzan, what advantage will it be to me? Will it not but rob the tribe of a great fighter? And if Turquoise be dead, he will know nothing of my supremacy. While alive, he will ever be an example to the other apes. Ka Goda, hissed Tarzan in Turquoise's ear, which in ape tongue means freely translated. Do you surrender? For a moment there was no reply, and Tarzan added a few more ounces of pressure, which elicited a horrified shriek of pain from the great beast. Ka Goda, repeated Tarzan. Ka Goda, cried Turquoise. Listen, said Tarzan, easing up a trifle, but not releasing his hold. I am Tarzan, king of the apes, mighty hunter, mighty fighter. In all the jungle there's none so great. You have said, Kagoda, to me. All the tribe have heard. Quarrel no more with your king or your people, for next time I shall kill you. Do you understand? Huh? Assented Turquoise. And you are satisfied? Huh, said the ape. Tarzan let him up, and in a few minutes all were back at their vocations, as though naught had occurred to mar the tranquility of their primeval forest haunts. But deep in the minds of the apes was rooted the conviction that Tarzan was a mighty fighter and a strange creature. Strange because he had it in his power to kill his enemy, but had allowed him to live unharmed. That afternoon, as the tribe came together, as was their wont before darkness settled on the jungle, Tarzan, his wounds washed in the limpid waters of the little stream, called the old males about him. You have seen again today that Tarzan of the Apes is the greatest among you, he said. Huh, they replied with one voice. Tarzan is great. Tarzan, he continued, is not an ape. He is not like his people. His ways are not their ways, and so Tarzan is going back to the lair of his own kind by the waters of the great lake, which has no further shore. You must choose another to rule you, for Tarzan will not return. And thus, young Lord Greystoke, took the first step toward the goal which he had set, the finding of other men like himself. Dun dun dun. Ba-da-dee. My goodness. What a day. What a happy Wednesday. What a wild story. All right. It is that time. We're going to go ahead and take a short ad break while I refill my water, use the restroom, and finish off the rest of my coffee. It's almost done. So when I return, we shall read another 2, maybe 3 chapters. We're only an hour and a half in. I feel like we're going through a chapter about one chapter every 30 minutes. So like a 3-hour window feels right. So about 6 chapters in that time. So hold your horses. I will be right back. Thank you for listening, and I hope you're enjoying the story. I will be back as soon as I can. Yeah, potato. True potato, they really did. They're like, you know what? We're just gonna like censor the ever-living tar out of it. Just imagine like a whole military document just redacted, redacted. Like, not gonna have that, not gonna have that. Oh, Tantor the elephant. That's kind of cool. Not gonna have that, not gonna have that. And just, yeah. His adopted mom gets murdered. No. We're gonna have to reword that. Just rewrite the ever-living tar out of it. Okay, I will be right back. Hang tight, and when I return, we'll start with chapter 13. Alley-oop. I don't know why it's okay. That is not the stream transition that I had set up, but OBS be wildin', I guess. All right. Oh, hey, welcome in, Casman. Been a minute. Hope you're doing well. I am about to read chapter 13, His Own Kind. So at this point, Tarzan has left the tribe of Kerchak, or his tribe of apes. The village nearby is very afraid of him. Not him specifically, but whatever entity that is plaguing their village, stealing from their crops and killing their warriors, which fair. I think man's fear of the unknown has probably caused the most atrocities in humanity. We are going to continue with chapter 13 of Edgar Rice Burroughs' Tarzan of the Apes. The title of this one is His Own Kind. Hope everyone hydrated on the break, grabbed a snack, curled up with a blanket, did whatever you needed to do to enjoy the story. Huh. Google is always listening, apparently, and that is mildly terrifying, because I know I turned that off. Must have been the latest update. Okay. All right, so chapter 13, His Own Kind. Ba ba ba. There we go. Hey, Rusi. Welcome in. Actually, while we're at it, shout out at Roos, the silly goose, gaming and variety streamer. Good egg. What are we gonna see?
Ooh.
Oh, your old model before you
Am I
had clean
live?
hair.
No, okay. Damn it. Damn it.
Damn it.
You know what time it is, kiddos. It's time for the piss. It's time
Roos
for the piss.
is one of the reasons that I have a dab emote, because I just, when I get to watch their streams, they are they have a dab redeem. It's on my list of emotes to get done by Yuki as well. But yeah, so you'll have like a dab redeem. So I don't know how we'd use it, but it'll be there if you want to use it. But yeah, if you guys haven't checked out their content, I highly recommend you do so. Very funny, very enjoyable streams, very chill vibes, though a little chaotic. I think my favorite stream of theirs most recently was when they did the pressure washer simulator. That one was highly enjoyable. Yeah! Dab it on them haters, Ruth. Okay. Chapter 13, His Own Kind. The following morning, Tarzan, lame and sore from the wounds of his battle with Turkaz, set out toward the west and the sea coast. Mind you, half of his scalp was like torn off of his skull, so that couldn't have felt very good. He traveled very slowly, sleeping in the jungle at night, and reaching his cabin late the following morning. For several days he moved about but little, only enough to gather what fruit and nuts he required to satisfy the demands of hunger. In 10 days he was quite sound again, except for a terrible half-healed scar, which, starting above his left eye, ran across the top of his head, ending at the right ear. It was the mark left by Turkaz when he had torn the scalp away. Saw that coming. During his convalescence, Tarzan tried to fashion a mantle from the skin of Sabor, which had lain all this time in the cabin, but he found the hide had dried as stiff as a board, and as he knew naught of tanning, he was forced to abandon his cherished plan. Hey, Debbie, welcome in. Then he determined to filch what few garments he could from one of the men of Mbonga's village, for Tarzan of the Apes had decided to mark his evolution from the lower orders in every possible manner. Ah, thank you. And nothing seemed to him a more distinguishing badge of manhood than ornaments and clothing. To this end, therefore, he collected the various arm and leg ornaments he had taken from the warriors who had succumbed to his swift and silent noose, and donned them all after the way he had seen them worn. About his neck hung the golden chain from which depended the diamond-encrusted locket of his mother, the Lady Alice. At his back was a quiver of arrows slung from a leathern shoulder belt, another piece of loot from some vanquished warrior. About his waist was a belt of tiny strips of rawhide, fashioned by himself as a support for the homemade scabbard in which hung his father's hunting knife. The longbow, which had been Kulonga's, hung over his left shoulder. The young Lord Greystoke was indeed a strange and warlike figure, his mass of black hair falling to his shoulders behind and cut with his hunting knife to a rude bang upon his forehead, that it might not fall before his eyes. His straight and perfect figure, muscled as the best of the ancient Roman gladiators, must have been muscled, and yet with the soft and sinuous curves of a Greek god, told at a glance the wondrous combination of enormous strength which with suppleness and speed. Pardon? Read that again. And yet with the soft and sinuous curves of a Greek god, told at a glance the wondrous combination of enormous strength with suppleness and speed. How very silly. A personification was Tarzan of the Apes, of the primitive man, the hunter, the warrior. With the noble poise of his handsome head upon those broad shoulders, and the fire of life and intelligence in those fine, clear eyes, he might readily have typified some demigod of a wild and warlike bygone people of his ancient forest. Right? But of these things Tarzan did not think. He was worried because he had no clothing to indicate to all the jungle folks that he was a man and not an ape, and grave doubt often entered his mind as to whether he might not yet become an ape. Was not hair commencing to grow upon his face? All the apes had hair upon theirs, but the village men were entirely hairless, with very few exceptions. True, he had seen pictures in his books of men with great masses of hair upon lip and cheek and chin, but nevertheless Tarzan was afraid. Almost daily he whetted his keen knife and scraped and whittled at his young beard to eradicate this degrading emblem of apehood. Hear that, boys? You gotta cut off your beards. And so he learned to shave. Rudely and painfully, it is true, but nevertheless effectively. When he felt quite strong again after his bloody battle with Turcos, Tarzan set off one morning towards Mbonga's village. He was moving carelessly along a winding jungle trail instead of making his progress through the trees. when suddenly he came face to face with a warrior. The look of surprise on the savage face was almost comical, and before Tarzan could unsling his bow, the fellow had turned and fled down the path, crying out in alarm as though to others before him. Welcome, Encino. Oh, I hope D&D is going well. Tarzan took to the trees in pursuit, and in a few moments came in view of the men desperately striving to escape. There were 3 of them, and they were racing madly in single file through the dense undergrowth. Tarzan easily distanced them, nor did they see his silent passage above their heads, nor note the crouching figure squatted upon a low branch ahead of them, beneath which the trail led them. Tarzan let the first 2 pass beneath him, but as the third came swiftly on, the quiet noose dropped about the warrior's throat. A quick jerk drew it taut. There was an agonized scream for the victim, and his fellows turned to see his struggling body rise, as if by magic, slowly into the dense foliage of the trees above. Low-key, that would be super terrifying to see, like, your fellow warrior just suddenly yanked up into the trees above you. Nope, that's a nope for me. Gotta go. With affrighted shrieks, they wheeled once more and plunged on in their efforts to escape. Tarzan dispatched his prisoner quickly and silently, removed the weapons and ornaments, and, oh, the greatest joy of all, a handsome doeskin breechcloth, which he quickly transferred to his own person. Now indeed was he dressed as a man should be. None there was who could doubt. Now, wow, that the way that sentence is structured is yikes. None there was who could now doubt his high origin. How he should like to have returned to the tribe to parade before their envious gaze this wondrous finery. Taking the body across his shoulder, he moved more slowly through the trees toward the little palisaded village, for he again needed arrows. As he approached quite close to the enclosure, he saw an excited group surrounding the 2 fugitives who, trembling with fright and exhaustion, were scarce able to recount the uncanny details of their adventure. Miranda, they said, who had been ahead of them a short distance, had suddenly come screaming toward them, crying that a terrible and naked warrior was pursuing him. The 3 of them had hurried toward the village as rapidly as their legs would carry them. Again, Miranda's shrill cry of mortal terror had caused them to look back, and there they had seen the most horrible sight. Their companion's body flying upwards into the trees, his arms and legs beating the air, and his tongue protruding from his open mouth. No other sound did he utter, nor was there any creature in sight about him. The villagers were worked up into a state of fear bordering on panic, but wise old Mabanga affected to feel considerable skepticism regarding the tale, and attributed the whole fabrication to their fright in the face of some real danger. "You tell us this great story," he said, "because you do not dare to speak the truth. You do not dare admit that when the lion sprang upon Mirando, you ran away and left him. You are cowards." Scarcely had Mabanga ceased speaking when a great crashing of branches in the trees above them caused the villagers to look up in renewed terror. The sight that met their eyes made even wise old Mabanga shudder, for there, turning and twisting in the air, came the dead body of Mirando, to sprawl with a sickening reverberation upon the ground at their feet. With one accord, the villagers took to their heels, nor did they stop until the last of them was lost in the dense shadows of the surrounding jungle. Again, Tarzan came down into the village and renewed his supply of arrows and ate of the offering of food which the villagers had made to appease his wrath. Before he left, he carried the body of Mirando to the gate of the village and propped it up against the palisade in such a way that the dead face seemed to be peering around the edge of the gatepost down the path which led to the jungle. Then Tarzan returned, hunting, always hunting, to the cabin by the beach. It took a dozen attempts on the part of the thoroughly frightened villagers to re-enter their village, past the horrible, grinning face of their dead fellow, and when they found the food and arrows gone, they knew what they had only too well feared, that Mirando had seen the evil spirit of the jungle. That now seemed to them the logical explanation. Only those who saw this terrible god of the jungle died. For was it not true that none left alive in the village had never ever seen him? Therefore, those who had died at his hands must have seen him and paid the penalty with their lives. As long as they supplied him with arrows and food, he would not harm them unless they looked upon him. So it was ordered by Mbonga that in addition to the food offering, there should also be laid out an offering of arrows. For this Mbongo Kiwati, and this was done from Manongo? Yeah, for this Manongo Kiwati, and this was done from then on. Welcome in, Revi. How's it going? Hope you're well. If you ever chance to pass that far-off African village, you will still see before a tiny thatched hut, built just without the village, a tiny iron pot in which is a quantity of a tiny blah. A little iron pot in which is a quantity of food, and beside it a quiver of well-daubed arrows. When Tarzan came in sight of the beach where stood his cabin, a strange and unusual spectacle met his vision. On the placid waters of the landlocked harbor floated a great ship, and on the beach a small boat was drawn up. But most wonderful of all, a number of men like himself were moving about between the beach and his cabin. Tarzan saw that in many ways they were like the men of his picture books. He crept closer through the trees until he was quite close above them. There were 10 men, swarthy, sun-tanned, villainous-looking fellows. Now they had congregated by the boat and were talking in loud, angry tones with much gesticulating, and shaking of fists. Presently one of them, a little mean-faced, black-bearded fellow with a countenance which reminded Tarzan of Pamba the rat, laid his hand upon the shoulder of a giant who stood next him, and with whom all the others had been arguing and quarreling. The little man pointed inland, so that the giant was forced to turn away from the others to look in the direction indicated. As he turned, the little, mean-faced man drew a revolver from his belt and shot the giant in the back. The big fellow threw his hands above his head, his knees bent beneath him, and without a sound he tumbled forward upon the beach, dead. Hello, Kairu. The report of the weapon, the first that Tarzan had ever heard, filled him with wonderment. But even this unaccustomed sound could not startle his healthy nerves into even a semblance of panic. The conduct of the strangers, it was that caused him the greatest perturbation. He puckered his brows into frown of deep thought. It was well, thought he, that he had not given way to his first impulse to rush forward and greet these men as brothers. They were evidently no different from the villagers. no more civilized than the apes, no less cruel than Sabor. For a moment the others stood, looking at the little mean-faced man and the giant lying dead upon the beach. Then one of them laughed and slapped the little man upon the back. There was much more talk and gesticulating, but less quarreling. Presently they launched the boat and all jumped into it and rowed away toward the great ship, where Tarzan could see other figures moving upon the deck. When they had clambered aboard, Tarzan dropped to earth behind a great tree and crept to his cabin, keeping it always between himself and the ship. Slipping in at the door, he found that everything had been ransacked. His books and pencils strewed the floor, his weapons and shields and other store of treasures were littered about. As he saw what had been done, a great wave of anger surged through him, and the new-made scar upon his forehead stood suddenly out, a bar of inflamed crimson against his tawny hide. Quickly he ran to the cupboard and searched in the far recess of the lower shelf. Ah! He breathed a sigh of relief as he drew out the little tin box, and opening it, found his greatest treasures undisturbed. The photograph of the smiling, strong-faced young man and the little black puzzle book were safe. What was that? His quick ear had caught a faint but unfamiliar sound. Running to the window, Tarzan looked toward the harbor, and there he saw that a boat was being lowered from the great ship beside the one already in the water. Soon he saw many people clambering over the sides of the larger vessel and dropping into the boats. They were coming back in full force. For a moment, Tarzan watched while a number of boxes and bundles were lowered into the waiting boats. Then, as they shoved off from the ship's side, the ape-man snatched up a piece of paper and with a pencil printed on it for a few moments until it bore several lines of strong, well-made, almost letter-perfect characters. This notice he stuck upon the door with a small, sharp splinter of wood. Then, gathering up his precious tin box, his arrows, and as many bows and spears as he could carry, he hastened through the door and disappeared into the forest. When the two boats were beached upon the silvery sand, it was a strange assortment of humanity that clambered ashore. Some 20 souls in all there were, if the 15 rough and villainous appearing seamen could have been said to possess that immortal spark, since they were, forsooth, a most filthy and bloodthirsty looking aggregation. Reminds me of Treasure Island a little bit. The others of the party were of different stamp. One was an elderly man with white hair and large-rimmed spectacles. His slightly stooped shoulders were draped in an ill-fitting, though immaculate, frock coat. A shiny silk hat added to the incongruity of his garb in an African jungle. The second member of the party to land was a tall young man in white ducks, while directly behind came another elderly man with a very high forehead and a fussy, excitable manner. After these came a woman clothed like Solomon as to colors, her great eyes rolling in evident terror, first toward the jungle and then toward the cursing band of sailors who were removing the bales and boxes from the boats. The last member of the party to disembark was a girl of about 19, and it was the young man who stood at the boat's bow to lift her high and dry upon land. She gave him a brave and pretty smile of thanks, but no words passed between them. In silence, the party advanced toward the cabin. It was evident that whatever their intentions, all had been decided upon before they left the ship, and so they came to the door, the sailors carrying the boxes and bales, followed by the 5 who were of so different a class. The men put down their burdens, and then one caught sight of the notice which Tarzan had posted. "Ho, mates!" he cried. "What's here? This sign was not posted an hour ago, or I'll eat the cook." The others gathered about, craning their necks over the shoulders of those before them, but as few of them could read at all, and then only after the most laborious fashion, one finally turned to the little old man of the top hat and frock coat. "Hi, Professor," he called. "Step forward and read the bloomin' notice." Thus addressed, the old man came slowly to where the sailors stood, followed by the other members of his party. Adjusting his spectacles, he looked for a moment at the placard and then, turning away, strolled off, muttering to himself, "Most remarkable, most remarkable." "Hi, old fossil!" cried the man who had first called on him for assistance. Did you think we wanted you to read the bloomin' notice to yourself? Come back here and read it out loud, you old barnacle." The old man stopped, and turning back, said, "Oh, yes, my dear sir, 1,000 pardons. It was quite thoughtless of me, yes. Very thoughtless. Most remarkable, most remarkable." Again he faced the notice, and read it through, and doubtless would have turned off again to ruminate upon it, had not the sailor grasped him roughly by the collar and howled in his ear, "Read it out loud, you blithering old idiot." "Oh, yes, indeed," replied the professor softly, and adjusting his spectacles once more he read aloud. "This is the house of Tarzan. This is the house of Tarzan, the killer of beasts and many men. Do not harm the things which are Tarzan's. Tarzan watches, Tarzan of the Apes." "Who the devil is Tarzan?" cried the sailor who had spoken before. "He evidently speaks English," said the young man. "But what does Tarzan of the Apes mean?" cried the girl. "I do not know, Miss Porter," replied the young man, "unless we have discovered a runaway simian from the London Zoo who has brought back a European education to his jungle home. What do you make of it, Professor Porter?" he added, turning to the old man. Professor Archimedes Q. Porter adjusted his spectacles. "Ah, yes, indeed, most remarkable," said the professor. "But I can add nothing further to what I have already remarked in elucidation of this truly momentous occurrence." And the professor turned slowly in the direction of the jungle. "But, Papa," cried the girl, "you haven't said anything about it yet." "Tut, tut, child, tut, tut," responded Professor Porter in a kindly and indulgent tone. "Do not trouble your pretty head with such weighty and abstruse problems." And again he wandered slowly off in still another direction, his eyes bent upon the ground at his feet, his hands clasped behind him beneath the flowing tails of his coat. "I reckon the daffy old bounder don't know no more'n we do about it," growled the rat-faced sailor. "Keep a civil tongue in your head," cried the young man, his face paling in anger at the insulting tone of the sailor. "You've murdered our officers and robbed us. We are absolutely in your power, but you'll treat Professor Porter and Miss Porter with respect, or I'll break that vile neck of yours with my bare hands, guns or no guns." And the young fellow stepped so close to the rat-faced sailor that the latter, though he bore 2 revolvers and a villainous-looking knife in his belt, slunk back, abashed. "You damned coward!" cried the young man. "You'd never dare shoot a man until his back was turned. You don't dare shoot me even then!" And he deliberately turned his back full upon the sailor and walked nonchalantly away, as if to put him to the test. That's the end of the coffee. Here we go. The sailor's hand crept slyly to the butt of one of his revolvers. His wicked eyes glared vengefully at the retreating form of the young Englishman. The gaze of his fellows was upon him, but still he hesitated. At heart he was even a greater coward than Mr. William Cecil Clayton had imagined. What he would have done will never be known, For there was another factor abroad which none of the party had yet guessed would enter so largely into the problems of their life on this inhospitable African shore. Two keen eyes watched every move of the party from the foliage of a nearby tree. Tarzan had seen the surprise caused by his notice, and while he could understand nothing of the spoken language of these strange people, their gestures and facial expressions told him much. The act of the little rat-faced sailor in killing one of his comrades had aroused a strong dislike in Tarzan, and now that he saw him quarreling with the fine-looking young man, his animosity was still further stirred. Tarzan had never seen the effects of a firearm before, though his books had taught him something of them, but when he saw the rat-faced one fingering the butt of his revolver, he thought of the scene he had witnessed so short a time before, and naturally expected to see the young man murdered as had been the huge sailor earlier in the day. So Tarzan fitted a poison arrow to his bow and drew a bead upon the rat-faced sailor, but the foliage was so thick that he soon saw the arrow would be deflected by leaves or some small branch, and instead he launched a heavy spear from his lofty perch. Clayton had taken but a dozen steps. The rat-faced sailor had half drawn his revolver. The other sailors stood watching the scene intently. Professor Porter had already disappeared into the jungle. Whither he was being followed by the fussy Samuel T. Philander, his secretary and assistant. Hey, Curious, welcome in. Esmeralda, the woman, was busy sorting her mistress's baggage from the pile of bales and boxes beside the cabin, and Miss Porter had turned away to follow Clayton when something caused her to turn again toward the sailor. And then three things happened almost simultaneously. The sailor jerked out his weapon and leveled it at Clayton's back. Miss Porter screamed a warning, and a long, metal-shod spear shot like a bolt from above and passed entirely through the right shoulder of the rat-faced man. The revolver exploded harmlessly in the air, and the seaman crumpled up with a scream of pain and terror. Clayton turned and rushed back toward the scene. The sailors stood in a frightened group with drawn weapons, peering into the jungle. The wounded man writhed and shrieked upon the ground. Clayton, unseen by any, picked up the fallen revolver and slipped it inside his shirt. Then he joined the sailors in gazing, mystified, into the jungle. "Who could it have been?" whispered Jane Porter, and the young man turned to see her standing, wide-eyed and wondering, close beside him. "I dare say Tarzan of the Apes is watching us all right," he answered in a dubious tone. "I wonder now who that spear was intended for. If for Snipes, then our ape friend is a friend indeed." "By Jove, where are your father and Mr. Philander?" "There's someone or something in that jungle, and it's armed, whatever it is. Ho, Professor! Mr. Philander!" young Clayton shouted. There was no response. "What's to be done, Miss Porter?" continued the young man. "What's to be done, Miss Porter?" continued the young man, his face clouded by a frown of worry and indecision. "I can't leave you here alone with these cutthroats, and you certainly can't venture into the jungle with me, yet someone must go in search of your father. He is more than apt to wandering off aimlessly, regardless of danger or direction. And Mr. Philander is only a trifle less impractical than he. You will pardon my bluntness, but our lives are all in jeopardy here, and when we get your father back, something must be done to impress upon him the dangers to which he exposes you, as well as himself, by his absent-mindedness." "I quite agree with you," replied the girl, "and I am not offended at all. dear old papa would sacrifice his life for me without an instant's hesitation, provided one could keep his mind on so frivolous a matter for an entire instant. There is only one way to keep him in safety, and that is to chain him to a tree. That poor dear is so impractical." "I have it!" suddenly exclaimed Clayton. "You can use a revolver, can't you?" Hmm. Hmm. "Yes? Why?" "I have one. With you and Esmeralda with it, you and Esmeralda will be comparatively safe in this cabin, while I am searching for your father and Mr. Philander. Come, call the woman, I will hurry on. They can't have gone far." Jane Porter did as he suggested, and when he saw the door close safely behind them, Clayton turned toward the jungle. Some of the sailors were drawing the spear from their wounded comrade, and as Clayton approached, he asked if he could borrow a revolver from one of them while he searched the jungle for the professor. The rat-faced one, finding he was not dead, had regained his composure, and with a volley of oaths directed at Clayton, refused in the name of his fellows to allow the young man any firearms. This man, Snipes, had assumed the role of chief since he had killed their former leader, and so little time had elapsed that none of his companions had yet questioned his authority. Clayton's only response was a shrug of the shoulders, but as he left them he picked up the spear which had transfixed Snipes, and thus primitively armed the son of the then Lord Greystoke strode into the dense jungle. Every few moments he called aloud the names of the wanderers. The watchers in the cabin by the beach heard the sound of his voice growing ever fainter and fainter, until at last it was swallowed up by the myriad noises of the primeval wood. When Professor Archimedes Q. Porter and his assistant Samuel T. Philander, after much insistence on the part of the latter, had finally turned their steps toward camp, they were as completely lost in the wild and tangled labyrinth of the matted jungle as two human beings well could be, though they did not know it. It was by the merest caprice of fortune that they headed toward the west coast of Africa instead of toward Zanzibar on the opposite side of the dark continent. When in a short time they reached the beach, only to find no camp in sight, Philander was positive that they were north of their proper destination, while as a matter of fact they were about 200 yards south of it. It never occurred to either of these impractical theorists to call aloud on the chance of attracting their friends' attention. Instead, with all the assurance that deductive reasoning from a wrong premise induces in one, Mr. Samuel T. Philander grasped Professor Archimedes Q. Porter firmly by the arm and hurried the weakly protesting old gentleman off in the direction of Cape Town, 1,500 miles to the south. When Jane Porter and Esmeralda found themselves safely behind the cabin door, the woman's first thought was to barricade the portal from the inside. With this idea in mind, she turned in search for some means of putting it into execution, but her first view of the interior of the cabin brought a shriek of terror to her lips, and like a frightened child, the woman ran to bury her face on her mistress' shoulder. Jane Porter, turning at the cry, saw the cause of it lying prone upon the floor before them, the whitened skeleton of a man. A further glance revealed a second skeleton upon the bed. "What horrible place are we in?" murmured the awestruck girl, but there was no panic in her fright. At last, disengaging herself from the frantic clutch of the still shrieking Esmeralda, Jane Porter crossed the room to look into the little cradle, knowing what she should see there before ever the tiny skeleton disclosed itself in all its pitiful and pathetic frailty. What an awful tragedy these poor mute bones proclaimed, the girl shuddered at thought of the eventualities which might lie before herself and her friends in this ill-fated cabin, the haunt of mysterious, perhaps hostile beings. Quickly, with an impatient stamp of her little foot, she endeavored to shake off the gloomy forebodings, and turning to Esmeralda, bade her cease her wailing. "Stop, Esmeralda, stop it this minute," she cried. "You are only making it worse. Why, I never saw such a big baby." She ended lamely, a little quiver in her own voice, as she thought of the 3 men upon whom she depended for protection, wandering in the depth of that awful forest. Soon the girl found that the door was equipped with a heavy wooden bar upon the inside, and after several efforts, the combined strength of the two enabled them to slip it into place, the first time in 20 years. Then they sat down upon a bench, with their arms about one another, and waited. Dun dun dun. Big stretch. Oh, man, I need to give myself a... Is this working? I gotta check to see if this one's working. It is not. I need to fix it. My goodness. Why are you over here and not where you're supposed to be? Bonk. Wah.
Drink water. Become moist.
I need more caffeine. My blood is not thin enough.
Yeah, you're onto something. Hydration, caffeination, all of that jazz. There we go. I don't know why this particular redeem always resets to the middle of the screen, and I'm not sure why. Well, so True Potato, technically yes, but also technically no. When he was a baby, because he was a baby when both of his parents died, he was actually taken from the crib, and like the dead infant ape was placed in the crib instead of him, and Kala picked him up and she took him away as her own. So she left with him, you know, barely a couple weeks old, left their dead bodies to, you know, decompose on their own. And it wasn't until much later, when he was about, I think, 13, that he was mobile enough that Kerchak's ape family came through the area again, and he was able to find a way back into the cabin. And at that time, both his mother and father had long since been desiccated and dried up, and I'm assuming consumed by insects, because the windows and everything didn't really let much in. They were pretty tightly secured safely into that cabin. And so now I'm assuming with the ransacking, the bones had been rattled around. But yes, I too, Rev, I drink lots of water, and some of it is because people remind me. Some of it is because I talk too long and my throat, I can feel it, like a little tickle. I have time for one more, I think. One more chapter. And then we will call it for today. And then we'll find somebody to raid. I'm not sure who's out there right now, but we'll find somebody. And yes, I agree. Tarzan, be crazy. Okay. We are on to chapter 14. So that would be, right? So 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. We'll see how this goes. If it's short, then 2. If it's long, then 1. Also, Derpy, thank you for the Gigantify emote from earlier. I just realized I always forget that those cost bits. Like, oh yeah. I was just like excited for the nuggies and the fries, so I lost track. Thank you. Chapter 14. At the Mercy of the Jungle. Bum, bum, bum. After Clayton had plunged into the jungle, the sailors, mutineers of the Arrow, fell into discussion of their next step. But on one point all were agreed, that they should hasten to put off to the anchored Arrow, where they could at least be safe from the spears of their unseen foe. And so, while Jane Porter and Esmeralda were barricading themselves within the cabin, the cowardly crew of cutthroats were pulling rapidly for their ship in the 2 boats that had brought them ashore. So much had Tarzan seen that day that his head was in a whirl of wonder, but the most wonderful sight of all, to him, was the face of the beautiful girl. Here at last was one of his own kind, of that he was positive, and the young man and the 2 old men, they too were much as he had pictured his own people to be. But doubtless they were as ferocious and cruel as other men he had seen. The fact that they alone of all the party were unarmed might account for the fact that they had killed no one. They might be very different if provided with weapons. Tarzan had seen the young man pick up the fallen revolver of the wounded Snipes and hide it away in his breast, and he had also seen him slip it cautiously to the girl as she entered the cabin door. He did not understand anything of the motives behind all that he had seen, but somehow, intuitively, he liked the young man and the 2 old men, and for the girl he had a strange longing, which he scarcely understood. As for the big woman, she was evidently connected in some way to the girl, and so he liked her also. For the sailors, and especially Snipes, he had developed a great hatred. He knew by their threatening gestures and by the expressions upon their evil faces that they were enemies of the others of the party, and so he decided to watch them closely. Tarzan wondered why the men had gone into the jungle, nor did it ever occur to him that one could become lost in that maze of undergrowth, which to him was as simple as is the main street of your own hometown to you. When he saw the sailors row away toward the ship, and knew that the girl and her companion were safe in his cabin, Tarzan decided to follow the young man into the jungle and learn what his errand might be. He swung off rapidly in the direction taken by Clayton, and in short time heard faintly in the distance the now only occasional calls of the Englishman to his friends. Presently, Tarzan came up with the man, who almost fatigued, was leaning against a tree, wiping the perspiration from his forehead. The ape man, hiding safe behind a screen of foliage, sat watching this new specimen of his own race intently. At intervals, Clayton called aloud, and finally it came to Tarzan that he was searching for the old man. Tarzan was on the point of going off to look for them himself, when he caught the yellow glint of a sleek hide moving cautiously through the jungle toward Clayton. It was Sheeta, the leopard. Now Tarzan heard the soft bending of grasses and wondered why the young man was not warned. Could it be he had failed to note the loud warning? Never before had Tarzan known Sheeta to be so clumsy. No, the man did not hear. Sheeta was crouching for the spring, and then, shrill and horrible, there rose upon the stillness of the jungle the awful cry of the challenging ape, and Sheeta turned, crashing into the underbrush. Clayton came to his feet with a start. His blood ran cold. Never in all his life had so fearful a sound smote upon his ears. He was no coward, but if ever man felt the icy fingers of fear upon his heart, William Cecil Clayton, eldest son of Lord Greystoke of England, did that day in the fastness of the African jungle.
Ali Bashi just followed.
Welcome in, Ali Bashi. So, additional context. So Tarzan is the son of the original Lord Greystoke and Alice, his mother, and they went to Africa, and then because they never came back, Lord Greystoke's younger brother became the lord of the manor, like took over the lordship, and so now his son, therefore Tarzan's cousin, is William Cecil Clayton. Okay, I see how it all works together. Also, hi, welcome in. I am currently reading Tarzan of the Apes, so feel free to relax and enjoy the story. The noise of some great body crashing through the underbrush so close behind him, and the sound of the blood-curdling shriek from above tested Clayton's courage to the limit, but he could not know that it was to the very voice he owed his life, nor that the creature who hurled it forth was his own cousin, the real Lord Greystoke. The afternoon was drawing to a close, and Clayton, disheartened and discouraged, was in a terrible quandary as to the proper course to pursue. Whether to keep on in search of Professor Porter at the almost certain risk of his own death in the jungle by night, or to return to the cabin where he might at least serve to protect Jane Porter from the perils which confronted her on all sides. So far, so good, Allie. He disliked to return to camp without her father. Still more, he shrank from the thought of leaving her alone and unprotected in the hands of the mutineers of the Arrow, or to the hundred unknown dangers of the jungle. Possibly, too, he thought, ere this the professor and Philander had returned to camp. Yes, that was more than likely. At least he would return and see, before he continued what bade fair to be a most fruitless quest. And so he started, stumbling back through the thick and matted underbrush in the direction that he thought the cabin lay. To Tarzan's surprise, the young man was heading further into the jungle in the general direction of Mbonga's village, and the shrewd young ape man was convinced that he was lost. To Tarzan this was scarcely comprehensible, but his judgment told him that no man would venture toward the village of the cruel villagers armed only with a spear, which, from the awkward way in which he carried it, was evidently an unaccustomed weapon to this man. Nor was he following the trail of the old men, that they had crossed and left long since, though it had been fresh and plain before Tarzan's eyes. Tarzan was perplexed. The fierce jungle would make easy prey of this unprotected stranger in very short time if he were not guided quickly to the beach. Yes, there was Numa the lion even now stalking the man a dozen paces to the right. Clayton heard the great body paralleling his course, and now there rose upon the evening air the beast's thunderous roar. The man stopped with upraised spear and faced the brush from which issued the awful sound. The shadows were deepening. Darkness was settling in. God, to die here alone beneath the fangs of wild beasts, to be torn and rended, to feel hot breath of the brute on his face as the great paw crushed down upon his breast. For a moment, all was still. Clayton stood rigid with raised spear. Presently a faint rustling of the bush apprised him of the stealthy creeping of the thing behind. It was gathering for the spring. At last he saw it, not 20 feet away, the long, lithe, muscular body and tawny head of a huge, black-maned lion. The beast was upon its belly, moving forward very slowly. As its eyes met Clayton's, it stopped and deliberately, cautiously, gathered its hindquarters beneath it. In agony, the man watched, fearful to launch his spear, powerless to fly. He heard a noise in the tree above him, some new danger, he thought, but he dared not take his eyes from the yellow-green orbs before him. There was a sharp twang, as of a broken banjo string, and at the same instant an arrow appeared in the yellow hide of the crouching lion. With a roar of pain and anger, the beast sprang, but somehow Clayton stumbled to one side, and as he turned again to face the infuriated king of beasts, he was appalled at the sight which confronted him. Almost simultaneously with the lion's turning to renew the attack, a naked giant dropped from the tree above squarely on the brute's back. With lightning speed, an arm that was banded with layers of iron muscle encircling the huge neck, and the great beast was raised from behind, roaring and pawing the air, raised as easily as Clayton would have lifted a pet dog. The scene he witnessed there in the twilight depths of the African jungle was burned forever into the Englishman's brain. The man before him was the embodiment of physical perfection and giant strength. Yet it was not upon these he depended in his battle with the great cat, for mighty as were his muscles, they were as nothing by comparison with Numa's. To his agility, to his brain, and to his long, keen knife he owed his supremacy. His right arm encircled the lion's neck, while the left hand plunged the knife time and again into the unprotected side behind the left shoulder. The infuriated beast pulled up and backwards until he stood upon his hind legs, struggling impotently in this unnatural position. Had the battle been of a few seconds longer duration, the outcome might have been different. But it was all accomplished so quickly that the lion had scarce time to recover from the confusion of its surprise ere it sank lifeless to the ground. Then the strange figure which had vanquished it stood erect upon the carcass, and throwing back the wild and handsome head, gave out the fearsome cry which a few moments earlier had so startled Clayton. Before him he saw the figure of a young man, naked except for a loincloth and a few barbaric ornaments about arms and legs, on the breast a priceless diamond locket gleaming against smooth brown skin. The hunting knife had been returned to its homely sheath, and the man was gathering up his bow and quiver from where he had tossed them when he leaped to attack the lion. Clayton spoke to the stranger in English, thanking him for his brave rescue and complimenting him on the wondrous strength and dexterity he had displayed. But the only answer was a steady stare and a faint shrug of the mighty shoulders, which might betoken either disparagement of the service rendered or ignorance of Clayton's language. When the bow and quiver had been slung to his back, the wild man, for such Clayton now thought him, once more drew his knife and deftly carved a dozen large strips of meat from the lion's carcass. Then, squatting upon his haunches, he proceeded to eat, first motioning Clayton to join him. The strong, white teeth sank into the raw and dripping flesh in an apparent relish of the meal, but Clayton could not bring himself to share the uncooked meat with his strange host. Instead, he watched him, and presently there dawned upon him the conviction that this was Tarzan of the Apes, whose notice he had seen posted upon the cabin door that morning. If so, he must speak English. Again Clayton essayed speech with the ape man, but the replies, now vocal, were in a strange tongue, which resembled the chattering of monkeys mingled with the growling of some wild beast. No, this could not be Tarzan of the Apes, for it was very evident that he was an utter stranger to English. When Tarzan had completed his repast, he rose, and, pointing in a very different direction from that which Clayton had been pursuing, started off through the jungle toward the point he had indicated. Clayton, bewildered and confused, hesitated to follow him, for he thought he was but being led more deeply into the mazes of the forest. But the ape man, seeing him disinclined to follow, returned and, grasping him by the coat, dragged him along until he was convinced that Clayton understood what was required of him. Then he left him to follow voluntarily. The Englishman, finally concluding that he was a prisoner, saw no alternative open but to accompany his captor, and thus they traveled slowly through the jungle, while the sable mantle of the impenetrable forest night fell about them, and the stealthy footfalls of padded paws mingled with the breaking of twigs and the wild calls of the savage life that Clayton felt closing in upon him. Suddenly, Clayton heard the faint report of a firearm. A single shot, and then silence. In the cabin by the beach, two thoroughly terrified women clung to each other as they crouched upon the low bench in the gathering darkness. The woman sobbed hysterically, bemoaning the evil day that had witnessed her departure from her dear Maryland, while the young girl, dry-eyed and outwardly calm, was torn by inward fears and forebodings. She feared not more for herself than for the three men whom she knew to be wandering in the abysmal depths of the savage jungle, from which she now heard issuing the almost incessant shrieks and roars, barkings and growlings of its terrifying and fearsome denizens as they sought their prey. And now there came the sound of a heavy body brushing against the side of the cabin. She could hear the padded paws upon the ground, hear the great padded paws upon the ground without. Then, for an instant, all was silent. Ever the bedlam of the forest died to a faint murmur. Then she distinctly heard the beast without sniffing at the door, not 2 feet from where she crouched. Instinctively the girl shuddered and shrank closer to the woman. "Hush," she whispered. "Hush, Esmeralda," for the woman's sobs and groans seemed to have attracted the thing that stalked there just beyond the thin wall. Hey, Amara, welcome in. I haven't seen you in a minute. I hope you're doing well. A gentle scratching sound was heard on the door. The brute tried to force an entrance, but presently this ceased, and again she heard the great pads creeping stealthily around the cabin. Again they stopped. Beneath the window on which the terrified eyes of the girl now glued themselves. "God," she murmured, for now silhouetted against the moonlit sky beyond, she saw framed in the tiny square of the lattice window the head of a huge lioness. The gleaming eyes were fixed upon her in intent ferocity. Look, Esmeralda, she whispered. For God's sake, what shall we do? Look, quick, the window. Esmeralda, cowering still closer to her mistress, took one affrighted glance toward the little square of moonlight, just as the lioness emitted a low, savage snarl. The sight that met the poor woman's eyes was too much for the already overstrung nerves. "Oh, Gabrielle!" she shrieked, and slid to the floor, an inert and senseless mass. For what seemed an eternity, the great brute stood with its forepaws upon the sill, glaring into the little room. Presently it tried the strength of the lattice with its great talons. The girl had almost ceased to breathe when, to her relief, the head disappeared, and she heard the brute's footsteps leaving the window. But now they came to the door again, and once more the scratching commenced. This time with increasing force until the great beast was tearing at the massive panels in a perfect frenzy of eagerness to seize its defenseless victims. Could Jane Porter have known the immense strength of that door, builded piece by piece, she would have felt less fear of the lioness reaching her by this avenue. Little did John Clayton imagine when he fashioned that crude but mighty portal that one day, 20 years later, it would shield a fair American girl, then unborn, from the teeth and talons of a man-eater. For fully 20 minutes the brute alternatively sniffed and tore at the door, occasionally giving voice to a wild, savage cry of baffled rage. At length, however, she gave up the attempt, and Jane Porter heard her returning toward the window, beneath which she paused for an instant and then launched her great weight against the time-worn lattice. The girl heard the wooden rods groan beneath the impact, but they held, and the huge body dropped back to the ground below. Again and again the lioness repeated these tactics, until finally the horrified prisoner within saw a portion of the lattice give way, and in an instant one great paw and the head of the animal were thrust within the room. Slowly, the powerful neck and shoulders spread the bars apart, and the lithe body protruded further and further into the room. As in a trance, the girl rose, her hand upon her breast, wide eyes staring horror-stricken into the snarling face of the beast, scarce 10 feet from her. At her feet lay the prostrate form of the woman. If she could but arouse her, their combined efforts might possibly avail to beat back the fierce and bloodthirsty intruder. Jane Porter stooped to grab the woman by the shoulder. Roughly she shook her. "Esmeralda, Esmeralda," she cried, "help me, or we are lost." Esmeralda slowly opened her eyes. The first object they encountered was the dripping fangs of the hangry lioness. With a horrified scream, the poor woman rose to her hands and knees, and in this position scurried across the room, shrieking, "Oh, Gabrielle! Oh, Gabrielle!" at the top of her lungs. Esmeralda weighed some 280 pounds, which enhanced nothing the gazelle-like grace of her carriage when walking erect, but her extreme haste, added to her extreme corpulency, produced a most amazing result when Esmeralda elected to travel on all fours. For a moment the lioness remained quiet, with intense gaze upon the flitting Esmeralda, whose goal appeared to be the cupboard, into which she attempted to propel her huge bulk, but as the shelves were built but 9 or 10 inches apart, she only succeeded in getting her head in, whereupon, with a final screech, which paled the jungle noises into insignificance, she fainted once again. That poor woman. With the subsistence of Esmeralda, the lioness renewed her efforts to wriggle her huge bulk through the weakening lattice. The girl, standing pale and rigid against the further wall, sought with ever increasing terror for some loophole of escape. Suddenly her hand, tight pressed against her bosom, felt the hard outline of the revolver that Clayton had left with her earlier in the day. Quickly, she snatched it from its hiding place and leveling it full at the lioness's face, pulled the trigger. There was a flash of flame, the roar of the discharge, and an answering roar of pain and anger from the beast. Jane Porter saw the great form disappear from the window, and then she too fainted, the revolver falling at her side. But Sabor was not killed. Is Sabor just the term? So Kuma is the male lion and Sabor is all female lions? Because we already know that Tarzan killed Sabor, so it must mean okay. The more you know. But Sabor was not killed. The bullet had but inflicted a painful wound in one of the great shoulders. It was the surprise at the blinding flash and the deafening roar that had caused her hasty, though but temporary, retreat. In another instant, she was back at the lattice, and with renewed fury from clawing at the aperture, but with lessened effect, since the wounded member was almost useless. She saw her prey, the two women, lying senseless upon the floor. There was no longer any resistance to be overcome. Her meat lay before her, and Sabor had only to worm her way through the lattice to claim it. Slowly, she forced her great bulk inch by inch through the opening. Now her head was through, now one great forearm and shoulder. Carefully she drew up the wounded member to insinuate it gently beyond the tight pressing bars. A moment more, and both shoulders through the long, sinuous body, and the narrow hips would glide quickly after. It was on this sight that Jane Porter again opened her eyes. Ooh, doggy. And on that note, I think that is it for today. Oh man, that's intense. Very intense. So Jane Porter is an American daughter of a professor. The young Clayton is there, or returning with his cousin, the elder Clayton, technically, if we want to get real technical. So Tarzan, the son of the previous Lord Greystoke, Lord Clayton. I don't know, it's getting a little more complicated and wild. There's a lot more people involved. There's also some language which I am not 100% keen on. In fact, quite unkeen on. But I digress. We are about halfway through the book, so we still have at least, I think, 3 more reading sessions, perhaps. Maybe more. No, either 3, maybe 4 reading sessions to finish this book. I went ahead and, let me put that there. I went ahead and restarted or revised the numbering system for these episodes of the classic literature series, because I did take the holiday literature series out of the numerization, and those are up on my YouTube. So I've reordered the numbers, and I'm trying to put everything in the classic literature series list on YouTube. I still have a lot of time signatures I need to put in, but as I finish each one of these, I am going to work towards getting it uploaded onto YouTube directly until the point where I'm fully caught up, and then I'll be able to do live streams simultaneously on Twitch and YouTube, and then I won't have to worry about having to do uploads. But I'm not there yet. I'm almost there, but either way. Let's find somebody lovely to visit, and I hope you wonderful Librephiles have enjoyed the reading. Let's see if there's anybody in reading fun. A lot of ASMR. I wanted to try something different just because sometimes changing up whatever category you're in can get new faces to see your content. And man, the Sari bot is not messing around today. That's the second bot today. Let's see. Reading fun. Ah, Fallen, that's very kind of you to say. Let's see. We've got Alan and Bill the Duck. Always a good time. They're reading some short stories. That might be fun. There's some Ranma fanfic from Zadley. Book Twitch. That, okay. That is in Spanish. That probably not a good fit. Oh no, I'm sorry. I stand corrected. That's Portuguese. I have not seen Zadley before. I think that would be really nice to go raid them. Something a little bit different. They've been up for almost 2 hours, so they might only be up for another hour. I'm not sure. I haven't seen them before, but they're reading Ranma fanfic, and who doesn't love good manga? So, let's go say hello. It looks like they have a guest with them. Yeah, we'll go check them out. Okay, yes, we're gonna go ahead and make that jump. We'll set that to that. And then, let's go ahead. Thanks, Revi. We'll do leaving library, there we go. Finished, we are, done reading Tarzan for today. And then another, helps if I spell it correctly. So, copy. There we go. And then add another raid at the end. If it'll let me. All right. That will be the raid message. Excellent. All right, everyone. Hold on to your horses and let's go raid Zadley. Alley-oop.